the ancient world achieved feats we still struggle to replicate today. The term Dark Ages suggests a simple time, but it was actually an era of catastrophic forgetting, where entire libraries of human ingenuity vanished. This exploration will reveal 30 specific technologies lost in that shadow, giving you a startling new lens on history itself. How did concrete that repairs itself disappear? What was the liquid fire that could burn on water? By the end, you will see the entire sweep of human progress not as a straight line, but as a fragile story full of heartbreaking gaps. What do you believe is our own civilization's most vulnerable knowledge? Picture a world where the roads fall silent. In the 5th century, the vast, interconnected machine of the Western Roman Empire began to seize and fracture. Legions, leaving frontiers porous, and the grand administrative systems that had unified a continent for centuries slowly dissolved into a patchwork of local powers. This was not a single, dramatic event, but a long, grinding process of unraveling. The centralized authority that had funded massive engineering projects, maintained vast libraries, and supported specialized guilds of artisans simply evaporated. With it went the stable trade routes that had carried not just silk and spices, but more importantly, ideas and instruction manuals across thousands of miles. Cities, the traditional hubs of learning and complex craft, shrank as people retreated to the countryside, their lives increasingly focused on immediate survival and local defense. This era, what historians often call the early Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, was defined by this profound fragmentation. It is crucial to understand this not as a period of universal stupidity, but of severed connections. Innovations certainly continued in isolated pockets, in monasteries and in some royal courts, but the systematic, society-wide transmission of intricate knowledge broke down. A master glassmaker in a decaying city might possess incredible skill, but with no apprentices and no market for his luxury goods, that skill died with him. The very infrastructure for remembering how to do difficult things collapsed. This created a kind of collective amnesia, where technologies that required large-scale coordination, specialized materials from distant sources, or years of theoretical study simply faded from common practice. They became legends, then mysteries. To grasp the true scale of what was forgotten, we must start with the physical substance that held the empire itself together, a material so advanced we are only now beginning to recreate its secrets. That dome is not a monument of stone, but of a forgotten science. The Pantheon in Rome has stood, completely intact, for nearly 2,000 years, surviving earthquakes, invasions, and the relentless wear of time. Modern concrete structures often show significant decay within mere decades, yet this ancient masterpiece mocks our own engineering. The Romans called their material opus, and its secret was not just in what they mixed, but in what happened after it was poured. While our concrete is brittle and cracks easily, Roman concrete possessed a seemingly magical ability to heal itself. The crucial ingredient was a specific volcanic ash, known as pozzolana, mined from regions like. When this ash was mixed with lime and seawater, it triggered a slow, complex chemical reaction that modern scientists have only recently begun to fully decode. Over centuries, seawater filtering through the concrete would actually cause the formation of rare, interlocking crystalline structures, like tiny fingers of mineral growth that filled any nascent cracks before they could spread. This material did not degrade in, it thrived in it, making Roman harbors and piers incredibly durable. Then the knowledge vanished. With the collapse of the empire's vast trade and logistical networks, the precise recipes and the understanding of why they worked faded into obscurity. Medieval builders, lacking access to the right volcanic materials and the chemical know-how, reverted to simpler, weaker lime mortars. Their castles and cathedrals, while magnificent, required constant and costly repair, a problem the Romans had largely engineered out of existence. It is a profound irony that we spent over a millennium trying to replicate what they had perfected, only rediscovering the principles through advanced electron microscopy in the 21st century. Today, this ancient wisdom is inspiring a new generation of self-healing concrete, promising to revolutionize marine construction and reduce our environmental footprint. It stands as our first clear example, a literal foundation, showing that a dark age is not defined by an absence of light, but by the extinguishing of a specific flame. And if we could lose the formula for something as fundamental as the rock beneath our cities, what else slipped through the cracks? Consider a form of communication so fluid and expressive it could capture the subtle inflections of the human voice, yet it vanished almost completely from the Western world. A liquid flame that could not be drowned defined an empire's survival for 700 years. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled, its eastern successor, the Byzantine Empire, faced relentless sieges by land and sea. Their most legendary and terrifying defense was a weapon they called liquid fire, known to their enemies as Greek fire. Imagine the horror of an attacking fleet witnessing a stream of fire arching from a Byzantine ship's prow, a jet of liquid that clung to wooden hulls and continued to burn fiercely even as it spread across the waves. Water only seemed to feed the inferno, and the screams of crews trapped on burning ships became a psychological weapon as potent as the flames themselves. This was not merely a flammable oil. It was a precisely engineered chemical weapon, a state secret guarded with the utmost severity. The formula was known only to a select few, possibly even just one family, and its components and the designs of the pressurized bronze siphons that projected it were considered matters of imperial security. Historical accounts suggest a mixture involving crude petroleum from natural surface wells, pine resin to make it sticky, and potentially quicklime, a substance that reacts violently with water, generating intense heat that could ignite the oily mixture on contact. The effect was a medieval form of napalm, a tool that allowed the outnumbered Byzantine navy to repel invasions and control the Mediterranean for centuries. And then, it was simply gone. The precise recipe and the engineering knowledge behind the delivery system vanished with the fall of Constantinople in the 15th century. Its loss was not just about forgetting a formula. It was the disappearance of an entire system of chemical knowledge and military engineering that had been too closely held, too secret. The empire protected its advantage so completely that when the end came, the knowledge had no chance to spread or be preserved elsewhere. This reminds us that a technology can be lost not only through neglect, but through overprotection. When a secret becomes so valuable, it is never written down, taught broadly, or allowed to evolve beyond a single, fragile point of control. The terrifying flame on the water was extinguished forever, not by an enemy, but by silence. While empires guarded weapons of war, other forms of priceless knowledge were being preserved in a far more delicate and beautiful medium, one that required the steady hand of a master and a patience we have nearly forgotten. The shimmering, watery pattern on a Damascus blade was more than decoration. It was a visual signature of a metal that the physics of its time. These were the swords of legend, carried by crusaders who returned from the Middle East with stories of weapons of impossible sharpness and resilience. It was said a true Damascus sword could cleave a silk scarf as it drifted through the air, or notch and shatter a common European blade without losing its own edge. This was not mere myth-making. It was a testament to a material science centuries ahead of its era. The secret began not in Syria, but in India, with ingots of a unique high-carbon steel known as woots. Craftsmen across the Islamic world, particularly in Damascus, mastered a forging process that transformed these ingots into something transcendent. The metal was heated, folded, and hammered in precise, repeated cycles, a painstaking dance of heat and force that coaxed a hidden microstructure to the surface. Modern analysis, using tools its creators could never have dreamed of, has revealed the astonishing truth. Within that rippling pattern lies a nanoscale architecture of carbon nanotubes and cementite nanowires, structures that give the steel a combination of hardness and flexibility modern factories still struggle to match. It was born from fire, intuition, and generations of closely guarded artisan knowledge. And then, by the 17th century, the flame went out. The knowledge faded. The specific source ores, with their crucial trace elements of vanadium and molybdenum, were lost or their importance forgotten. The exact thermal cycling, the intuitive read of the color of the metal at a critical moment, the secrets held within master-apprentice lineages, all dissipated like smoke. Today, we can etch a pattern onto steel to mimic the look, but we cannot truly resurrect the legendary substance itself. The loss of Damascus steel is particularly poignant because it represents more than a forgotten recipe. It is the extinction of an entire school of tactile, experiential science. It was a knowledge written not in books, but in the muscles and instincts of the smith, in the specific song of hammer on hot metal. When those masters passed without heirs to their full understanding, an entire chapter of human material genius closed forever. This pursuit of lost perfection, from self-healing stone to unbreakable metal, makes you wonder about the fragile mediums we use to preserve beauty itself. What if the very method of recording our greatest thoughts was itself a technology waiting to be forgotten? The most dazzling secret of the ancient world could fit in the palm of your hand. In the dim light of a museum case, the Lycurgus cup appears as a deep, opaque green, carved from a single block of glass with a mythological scene of King Lycurgus ensnared by vines. But hold it up to a light source, and a miracle happens. The entire vessel transforms, glowing from within with a luminous, translucent blood red. This 4th century Roman artifact is not just a masterpiece of artistry, it is a piece of functional magic, the earliest known practical application of nanotechnology. The Romans, nearly 2,000 years ago, were manipulating matter at a scale invisible to the human eye. They achieved this by impregnating the glass with a colloidal suspension of millions upon millions of gold and silver particles, each one ground down to a size of roughly 50 nanometers. To grasp how small that is, a human hair is about 80,000 nanometers wide. These artisans had somehow discovered, likely through generations of trial and observation, that by controlling the exact size of these metallic fragments, they could control the way light interacted with the glass. The smaller gold particles scatter green light when it reflects off the surface, but allow red light to pass straight through when a source is behind it. This precise manipulation of light scattering, a principle we now call the dichroic effect, would not be scientifically understood again until the 20th century with the advent of electron microscopes. And then, the knowledge to create it vanished. The exact method for producing such uniform nanoparticles, for suspending them evenly throughout the molten glass without clumping, and for reliably reproducing the stunning color shift was completely lost in the post-Roman world. This cup stands alone, a solitary beacon from a workshop whose other wonders we can only guess at. It shatters our assumption that nanotechnology is a purely modern frontier. Here is proof that ancient craftsmen, working without any theoretical framework of atomic theory, were achieving a level of material precision we associate with sterile clean rooms and advanced laboratories. Their genius was in their hands and their eyes, a tactile science of fire and chemistry that died with its masters. If they could engineer light itself at the nanoscale, what other subtle, sophisticated technologies have we mistaken for simple craft? This same pursuit of impossible precision, of manipulating the very fabric of reality to heal rather than to dazzle, would reach its zenith in a set of tools so advanced they would not look out of place in an operating room today. The gleaming edge of a Roman surgical scalpel was a promise of precision in an age we wrongly assume was crude. Step into a military hospital, and you would find an array of instruments that feel shockingly modern. Surgeons worked with bone drills for trepanation, delicate forceps for removing arrowheads, and complex speculums for gynecological and dental examinations. These were not rough implements, but refined tools crafted from high-quality steel and bronze, designed for specific, sophisticated procedures. They performed cataract surgery by couching the lens, removed bladder stones through lithotomy, and even practiced early forms of plastic surgery to repair damaged ears or noses. This was a world where medicine approached the human body as a system to be understood and repaired with mechanical skill. The true loss, however, was not merely the physical tools, though many of those molds were broken. It was the structured knowledge system that gave them purpose. Roman medical practice was supported by extensive texts from figures like Galen and whose works synthesized centuries of anatomical observation and surgical technique. This knowledge was taught in formalized settings, creating a continuum of expertise. With the empire's fragmentation, that continuum shattered. The great medical schools faded, the intricate texts were lost or left untranslated in scattered libraries, and the master-to-apprentice chains for complex surgical training were severed across much of Europe. Without the foundational knowledge, the sophisticated tools themselves became meaningless curiosities, or worse, were melted down for their metal. Medicine did not vanish, of course, but it regressed and transformed. In many regions, it became a more localized practice, blending folk remedy with religious belief, often lacking the systematic, interventionist approach of Roman surgery. The loss set healing arts back for centuries, a poignant reminder that a technology is more than its physical form. It is the living ecosystem of education, literature, and practice skill that sustains it. This regression in something as intimate as healthcare makes the disappearance of a more public comfort, a simple luxury that defined civilized daily life, feel like an especially stark step backward. A corroded bronze lump pulled from a shipwreck held a secret more profound than any treasure. In the year 1900, sponge divers off the coast of the Greek island of discovered the remains of a Roman-era cargo ship. Among statues and pottery, they recovered a fragmented, gear-filled artifact about the size of a large book. For decades, it was a baffling curiosity, its purpose obscured by centuries of undersea corrosion. Then, using advanced imaging techniques like X-ray tomography, researchers slowly peeled back the layers of time. What they revealed was nothing short of an intellectual earthquake. The mechanism, dating to the 2nd century before the Common Era, is the world's first known analog computer. This was not a simple calendar. It was a miniature bronze universe, powered by a hand crank and operated through a series of dials and pointers on its front and back. Its more than 30 intricately cut bronze gears, some with teeth so fine they must have been cut with tools we have yet to identify, meshed together to perform calculations of breathtaking complexity. By turning the crank, an operator could predict the positions of the sun, moon, and known planets against the backdrop of the zodiac, forecast lunar and solar eclipses with remarkable accuracy, and even track the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. It modeled the irregular motions of the moon, accounting for what we now call lunar anomaly, using a brilliant pin-and-slot mechanism that essentially created a variable speed gear. This device did not just tell time, it illustrated the very mechanics of the heavens, embodying a Hellenistic synthesis of astronomy, mathematics, and precision engineering that we never knew existed at that level. And then, for over 1,000 years, the very idea of such a machine vanished from the historical record. Nothing of comparable mechanical sophistication appears again until the great astronomical clocks of medieval Europe in the 14th century. The loss here is almost incomprehensible. It represents the complete erasure of an entire school of thought, a way of modeling cosmic order through intricate machinery. The mathematical principles, the engineering tolerances, the very mindset that could conceive of physical gears to mirror celestial cycles, all of it was swallowed by the centuries. This was not merely a forgotten gadget, it was a lost path in the history of science itself. Such genius could be built and then utterly forgotten. What does that tell us about the fragility of our own accumulated knowledge? The mechanism was a clockwork model of the cosmos, But the real power driving that ancient world came from a force far more elemental, one that required harnessing the very wind and water with an elegance we have only recently relearned. The silent, rust-colored cliffs of Las in Spain are not a natural wonder, but the scar of an ancient industrial conquest. To extract the gold hidden within these mountains, Roman engineers did not simply dig, they invented a method of terraforming on a breathtaking scale. They called it the wrecking of mountains. This was not mining in any traditional sense, it was hydraulic warfare against geology itself. First, teams of surveyors and laborers, often drawn from the local population, would carve a vast network of tunnels and galleries deep into the heart of a mountain, following the seams of quartz that held the precious metal. But this was only the preparation. The true feat of engineering lay miles away, high in the surrounding hills. Here, the Romans constructed elaborate systems of aqueducts and reservoirs to capture and store immense volumes of water from seasonal rains and streams. On the day of the operation, sluice gates would be opened, and this pent-up force would be unleashed down specially constructed wooden channels, rushing with terrifying pressure into the labyrinth of tunnels within the mountain. The water, with nowhere else to go, would build up until the hydraulic pressure became irresistible. With a roar that must have sounded like the earth itself tearing apart, entire sections of the mountainside would fracture, collapse, and be washed away in a deliberate, catastrophic avalanche of mud, rock, and slurry. This slurry would then flow through a series of settling channels where the heavier gold particles could be collected. The scale of this operation is almost impossible to overstate. At Laz, they moved an estimated 500 million cubic feet of earth and rock over 2 centuries, reshaping the landscape forever into the surreal, pinnacled ruins we see today. This technology represented the absolute zenith of Roman applied engineering, combining civil engineering, advanced hydrology, geology, and the brutal logistics of managing a vast, forced labor workforce. Its loss was not merely about forgetting how to build an aqueduct. After the empire's collapse, the organizational brain required for such projects, the centralized authority that could command the resources and manpower, simply ceased to exist. The intricate infrastructure decayed, the specialized knowledge of the surveyors and water masters dissipated, and the very ambition to dominate nature on such a scale faded for nearly a millennium. The silent, sculpted cliffs stand as a monument to a level of environmental ambition and control that Europe would not see again until the Industrial Revolution. This contrast between monumental, landscape-altering power and the loss of more intimate, daily comforts is stark. What good is moving mountains if you cannot reliably preserve the simple harvest from your own fields? The emperor's fear was not of the glass itself, but of what it represented. In the 1st century, Roman historians recorded a curious tale. A master craftsman, his name lost to time, presented Emperor Tiberius with a singular creation, a drinking bowl unlike any other. When the emperor, skeptical, deliberately let the vessel fall to the floor, it did not shatter into 1,000 pieces. Instead, it merely dented. With a few light taps from a small hammer, the artisan reportedly restored the bowl to its original, perfect shape. This material was called flexible glass. The story told by and later by Pliny the Elder takes a dark turn. Tiberius, alarmed, asked the craftsman if anyone else knew the secret of this unbreakable substance. When the man swore no one did, the emperor, according to the accounts, had him executed on the spot. His workshop was razed to the ground, the knowledge extinguished with brutal finality. The reasoning was coldly economic. If glass, a substance that could be made from common sand and fire, became more durable and valuable than gold or silver, it would destabilize the entire imperial treasury and the social order built upon it. Now, historians debate the literal truth of this episode. It may well be a parable, a story told to illustrate the dangers of innovation in a rigid, hierarchical society. Yet modern science tells us the concept is not pure fantasy. We have tempered glass today, which is far stronger than ordinary glass, and certain polymers or composite materials could theoretically produce a similar effect of denting rather than breaking. The possibility that a Roman artisan stumbled upon a rudimentary form of such a material through centuries of empirical experimentation is not zero, but the profound lesson of the story remains, regardless of its literal truth. It highlights a terrifyingly direct path to technological loss, one driven not by neglect or the slow decay of infrastructure, but by deliberate, violent suppression. A ruler, fearing the economic or social disruption a new invention might cause, could simply choose to erase it. The fragility of progress here is not material, but political. It shows that knowledge does not merely fade away, it can be murdered. This chilling idea of a single point of failure, where one decision can vaporize an entire branch of human ingenuity, makes the survival of other complex systems seem all the more miraculous. It forces us to ask, what other world-changing ideas were snuffed out before they could even be fully recorded? This tension between fragile knowledge and monumental ambition finds its ultimate expression in the very stones of a city that dared to defy gravity itself. The warmth of a Roman villa was a silent, invisible luxury. In the dead of winter, while the world outside lay frozen, a wealthy Roman could walk barefoot across intricate mosaic floors that radiated a gentle, even heat. This comfort was not provided by a roaring, smoky hearth in the corner of each room, but by an ingenious whole-house system known as the Hypocaust. The principle was elegant. A large, wood-burning furnace, often stoked by servants in a separate service area, would generate intense heat. But instead of letting that heat escape up a chimney, it was channeled. The floor of the main living spaces was raised on a grid of hundreds of small, sturdy brick pillars, creating a continuous hollow space, a plenum, beneath the entire house. The hot air and gases from the furnace were forced to snake through this underground maze, slowly releasing their warmth into the thick tile and concrete floor above. In more advanced designs, the heat would then continue its journey, rising through box-shaped ceramic pipes embedded within the walls before finally escaping through rooftop vents. This was not just heating, it was climate control, a sophisticated application of thermodynamics and fluid dynamics that required master bricklayers to construct, and a deep, intuitive understanding of airflow to design effectively. The entire house became a single, integrated heating appliance, providing clean, radiant warmth without filling the rooms with soot and smoke. Its disappearance after the Roman collapse in the West was a profound step backward in daily life. The knowledge of how to design and build these complex, labor-intensive structures faded with the specialized craftsmen and the wealthy patrons who could afford them. The great villas fell into ruin, and their heating systems were either scavenged for materials or simply buried. For centuries, through the long, dark winters of medieval Europe, the primary source of warmth regressed to the central open hearth. This meant smoky, drafty halls where heat was uneven and precious fuel was wasted, a reality that made indoor air quality poor and respiratory illness more common. The loss of the Hypocaust was more than the loss of a luxury. It was the loss of an entire philosophy of domestic comfort and public health, a retreat from communal, engineered warmth to a more primitive, isolated struggle against the cold. This regression in something as fundamental as staying warm makes the parallel loss of another Roman system, one dedicated not to comfort but to clarity, all the more telling. If we forgot how to heat our homes efficiently, how could we hope to preserve the clarity of our own vision? The true tragedy of Alexandria was not a single fire, but the slow dimming of a beacon. The Great Library was far more than a building filled with scrolls. It was the intellectual engine of the ancient world, a symbol of a radical idea that all human knowledge could and should be collected in one place. Scholars from across the Mediterranean were drawn there, subsidized by the state to think, debate, and copy texts brought in by every ship that docked in the harbor. Its shelves held unique copies of works by geniuses whose names we know only through fragments, like the engineering marvels of Archimedes and the automated theatrical machines of Heng of Alexandria. This was not a static archive. It was a living, breathing institution, the closest thing the ancient world had to a university combined with a national research laboratory. Its destruction was not a Hollywood moment of a single inferno, but a protracted, heartbreaking series of losses through accidental fires, civil conflicts, and finally, a long period of neglect as political priorities shifted and funding vanished. The scrolls, written on fragile papyrus, decayed in unmaintained storerooms or were repurposed as fuel. The real loss was systemic. When the library faded, it took with it the entire ecosystem it supported, the scholars who could read and interpret the texts, the scribes who them, and the students who would have become the next generation of engineers and scientists. A unique translation of a Babylonian astronomical text, a detailed map of Phoenician trade winds, a comprehensive treatise on hydraulic engineering, all gone. This event crystallizes a profound vulnerability that technology is not merely the physical artifact, the gear, or the tool. It is the living chain of institutional memory, the curated library, the funded academy, the community of practice that preserves and transmits the why along with the how. Without that, the most brilliant invention becomes a cryptic relic, its purpose and principles fading into myth. The library's fate reminds us that our greatest creations are not made of stone or steel, but of shared understanding, and that understanding is frighteningly fragile. It requires constant, active maintenance, a society that values its past enough to invest in its future. When that maintenance fails, when the institutions crumble, the light goes out not with a bang, but with the quiet, final turning of a last, unread page. This vulnerability to institutional collapse becomes starkly visible in the fate of a technology that was not stored on scrolls, but etched across an entire continent, a network so vast its abandonment reshaped the geography of power itself. The true genius of a Roman aqueduct was not in the stone, but in the slope. Those soaring arches we marvel at today were merely the grandest visible expression of a hidden, meticulous science of water. To bring fresh water from a mountain spring 50 miles away into the heart of a bustling city, Roman engineers performed a feat of precision that seems almost impossible without modern tools. The secret was the gradient, the subtle, unbroken downhill tilt of the entire channel. They calculated and maintained a drop of often just a few centimeters for every kilometer the water traveled. This required an astonishing mastery of surveying, using instruments like a long, water-leveled table to trace a perfect, gentle descent across valleys and hills. If the slope was too steep, the water would rush violently and erode the channel walls. If it was too shallow, the flow would stagnate and deposit silt. They got it just right, allowing gravity to do the work for centuries. But the aqueduct was far more than a simple stone gutter. It was a complete hydraulic system. Along its length, they built settling tanks where water could pause, allowing sand and debris to fall out before the clean flow continued. To cross deep valleys where arches were impractical, they constructed massive inverted siphons, lead or ceramic pipes that used the principles of pressure to force water down one side of a valley and back up the other, all without a single pump. In cities, they integrated distribution tanks and pressure-braking towers to manage the flow to different neighborhoods and public fountains. This was not a static monument. It was a living, managed utility. Its operation depended on a permanent professional class, a corps of engineers and maintenance workers who patrolled the channels, cleared blockages, and monitored water quality with detailed maps and logs. When the Western Empire fragmented, this vast, silent machine began to fail. The institutional knowledge evaporated first. The disbanded, their maps were lost, and the understanding of how to maintain the subtle gradients and complex siphon systems faded. Without constant care, channels clogged, arches cracked, and leaks drained the life from the system. One by one, the aqueducts fell silent, For the medieval cities that grew up within the old Roman walls, the consequence was a brutal regression in public health. They reverted to drawing water from local wells, often contaminated by seepage from cemeteries and waste pits, or directly from rivers that also served as sewers. The clear, clean mountain water that had flowed continuously into public baths and fountains was replaced by a source of constant sickness. The loss of hydraulic engineering was, in a very direct sense, a loss of health and urban vitality. It demonstrated that civilization is not just about art and law, but about the invisible systems that sustain daily life. And if the network for moving life-giving water could collapse, what happened to the even more complex networks that moved the lifeblood of trade and communication? Time itself was once a fluid, measured by the steady drip of ingenuity. In the bustling heart of 3rd century BCE Alexandria, a thinker named looked at a simple water clock, a bowl with a tiny hole, and saw a profound limitation. As the water level dropped, the pressure decreased, and the flow slowed, making the device increasingly inaccurate. His brilliant solution was a principle of feedback regulation. He designed a clock with not one, but 3 tiers. The top reservoir fed a constant, overflowing stream into a second chamber, which maintained a perfectly steady water level. This chamber then fed the actual timing mechanism with a flow that never varied. The result was the world's first truly accurate, mechanically regulated timepiece, but was not finished. His mind turned to the invisible force of air itself. He realized that compressed air could be a source of power and control, pioneering the field of pneumatics. He built force pumps that used pistons and valves to create pressure, and most famously, he is credited with inventing the water organ, which used water pressure to regulate the air supply to its pipes, producing a sound of unprecedented power and consistency. Here, in his workshop, lay the embryonic principles of automation, of using one controlled process to regulate another, and of harnessing air pressure for mechanical work. Yet, after the decline of the Hellenistic world and the eventual fading of Alexandria's scholarly prominence, the deeper understanding of these systems dissipated. While simple, water clocks continued to be used in various forms, the sophisticated feedback mechanisms and the systematic study of pneumatics that documented largely vanished from the Western toolkit. This loss had quiet but far-reaching consequences. It delayed the development of precise scientific instruments that relied on regulated conditions, and it kept the concept of time as something local, measured by the sun's shadow or the inconsistent burning of a candle, rather than a universal, measurable constant. The dream of automation, of machines that could regulate themselves, was shelved for over a millennium. It is a poignant loss, the silencing of a mind that heard the precise rhythm of the universe in the drop of water and the sigh of air. This pursuit of perfect regulation stands in stark contrast to another lost art, one that sought not to control nature's flow, but to capture its most fleeting and beautiful illusion with absolute fidelity. A king's greatest fear became the catalyst for a millennium of medical legend. The sixth of Pontus, a ruler locked in a long and bitter conflict with Rome, lived with a constant, gnawing suspicion of poison. His paranoia, however, was not idle. It was profoundly productive. Determined to render himself invulnerable, he embarked on a lifelong, gruesome experiment. He became his own chief researcher, testing countless substances on condemned prisoners and on himself, meticulously noting their effects. From this grim practice emerged his masterwork, a compound he named. This was no simple herbal remedy. It was a staggeringly complex formulation, a mix of more than 50 ingredients that included opium for pain, chopped vipers whose venom was thought to confer resistance, rare spices like cinnamon and myrrh, and a host of obscure roots and herbs, all ground together and mixed with honey into a thick paste. The logic behind this polypharmacy was surprisingly sophisticated. And the physicians who later refined his work were operating on an early principle of synergy, the idea that the combined effect of multiple compounds could be greater than the sum of their parts, potentially counteracting a wider array of unknown toxins. After his defeat, the Romans, ever pragmatic, adopted his formula. Over subsequent centuries, it was continually tweaked and expanded by Greek and Roman physicians, most notably by the personal doctor of Emperor Nero. It evolved into an even more elaborate preparation called theriac, which could contain up to 70 ingredients and required weeks of meticulous preparation. For over 1,000 years, theriac was the most famous and expensive drug in the Western world, a panacea carried by emperors, kings, and wealthy merchants as the ultimate insurance policy against treachery or plague. Its value lay not just in its ingredients, but in the systematic, empirical approach it represented. Practitioners debated the best sources for each component, the ideal grinding techniques, and the required aging process, treating it as a serious, if imperfect, science. The true loss, then, was not merely the fading of a specific recipe. With the fragmentation of the Roman world and the decline of its centralized medical schools, the deep pharmacological rationale behind theriac began to blur. The intricate understanding of why certain ingredients were combined, the recorded observations of their effects, the entire scaffold of empirical knowledge that supported it, slowly crumbled. What remained was often the shell without the substance. In the later medieval period, theriac recipes sometimes became more superstitious, incorporating odd items like mummy powder or bezoar stones, their preparation surrounded by ritual rather than rigorous procedure. The loss of and its legacy symbolizes a dark age within healing itself, a regression from a complex, if flawed, system of experimental antidote development toward a more fragmented and often mystical approach to poison. It shows that even the science of survival could be forgotten, leaving people to grasp at mysteries they no longer understood. This vulnerability, this forgetting of how to protect the body from within, finds a strange parallel in the loss of a technology designed to protect the mind from the vast, empty spaces outside the known world. A sphere hissing with steam could have rewritten the entire story of human labor. In the first century of the Common Era, in the same intellectual atmosphere of Alexandria that produced the mechanism, an inventor named Hero described a device he called in. It was elegantly simple in concept. A hollow metal sphere was mounted on a pair of pipes that fed steam from a heated cauldron below. Two more bent pipes, or nozzles, protruded from opposite sides of the sphere. As the steam rushed out through these nozzles, the sphere itself would spin, whirling faster and faster from the pure reaction force of the escaping jets. This was not just a curious fountain, it was a working steam turbine, a concrete demonstration of the principle that would one day underpin rocket engines and power plants. Hero and his contemporaries understood the physics at play, the action and reaction. They saw the conversion of heat into motion. And then they stopped. There remained a temple wonder, a philosophical toy to amuse the educated elite, a demonstration of cleverness rather than a seed for industry. The question is not why they built it, but why they never built upon it. Several profound barriers stood in the way. The Roman economy was fundamentally built on the widespread availability of slave labor and draft animals, making the economic incentive to develop labor-saving machinery far weaker. The metallurgy of the time could not produce the strong, reliable iron and steel needed to build high-pressure boilers that could safely contain the explosive force of steam on a large, practical scale. Perhaps most critically, there was a missing intellectual bridge, a failure of imagination to see this spinning sphere not as an end in itself, but as a component. No one connected the dots from this reactive force to the concept of a piston, a crank, a system of gears that could turn spinning motion into useful, repetitive work like pumping water or grinding grain. The loss here is hauntingly abstract. It was not the loss of a blueprint, but the loss of a trajectory. The intellectual curiosity to ask, "What can this do for us?" was not nurtured by the social and economic conditions of the time. That single conceptual gap, that failure to leap from demonstration to application, meant the immense physical power of steam sat dormant, a hissing secret in a temple courtyard, for over 1,500 years. It is a staggering counterfactual to consider, a world where the Industrial Revolution might have begun in Roman Egypt. This immense, untapped force of steam stands in stark contrast to a technology that sought not to conquer nature's power, but to understand its most subtle and beautiful language, a language written not in fire and metal, but in the geometry of sound itself. A hollow bronze giant once guarded a harbor, its form a testament to a forgotten industrial art. The Colossus of Rhodes, one of the ancient wonders, was not carved from stone, but cast in metal, a feat requiring a technology as magnificent as the statue itself. The Greeks and Romans had perfected a method called lost wax casting, or sire, to create monumental hollow bronzes that felt alive. The process was a stage symphony of materials and fire. It began with a sculptor crafting a detailed model in beeswax over a clay core. This wax model was then encased in a thick, fire-resistant mold made of clay and plaster. When the entire assembly was heated in a kiln, the wax would melt and drain out through carefully placed channels, leaving a perfect, empty cavity between the hardened core and the hardened mold. Then came the climactic moment. Workers would tilt a massive crucible, pouring molten bronze at a temperature exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit into that waiting space. The metal had to flow evenly to fill every intricate detail, from the folds of a garment to the curls of hair, without cooling too quickly or creating weak spots. Once the bronze cooled, and the outer mold and inner clay core were painstakingly broken away, revealing the rough casting. Master craftsmen would then spend months chasing the surface, polishing, engraving, and often adding inlaid eyes of glass or stone to complete the illusion of life. This knowledge allowed for the creation of statues on a staggering scale, like the legendary Colossus, which was said to be over 100 feet tall. The technology represented a peak of collaborative artistry, combining sculpture, advanced ceramics, and high-temperature metallurgy. But this intricate chain of expertise proved fragile. In the centuries after the Roman era, the specialized workshops capable of coordinating such large, risky, and expensive castings dissolved. The few surviving large bronzes faced a more direct threat. They were seen not as art, but as reservoirs of valuable metal. During times of conflict or economic hardship, these statues were systematically melted down to be recast as coins or, later, as cannons. The loss was profound, marking a centuries-long retreat from metallic grandeur. Without the ability to reliably cast at scale, the primary medium for grand public sculpture shifted decisively to stone. While marble could achieve breathtaking beauty, it lacked the tensile strength, the dynamic poses, and the luminous, reflective quality of polished bronze. The world of monumental art became heavier, more static, as a technology of light and fluid form was replaced by one of solid mass and shadow. This shift from capturing reflected light in metal to shaping solid stone mirrors, another curious transition, one where an entire civilization chose to abandon a different kind of illumination, not of art, but of daily life, trading a reliable, clean flame for the constant struggle of the open hearth. A light that needed no tending flickered in the darkest of places. Across cultures, from the temples of ancient Egypt to the sealed tombs of Rome, storytellers and chroniclers whispered of a marvel, the eternal flame. These were lamps reportedly discovered in long-forgotten crypts, burning steadily with a soft, cold light despite having been sealed away for centuries. While the tales of lamps burning for 1,000 years are almost certainly myth, they point stubbornly toward a kernel of lost truth, a genuine technology for creating long-lasting, low-maintenance illumination. The descriptions are eerily consistent, a light that did not flicker like fire, that produced little to no smoke, and that sometimes reignited itself when exposed to air. Modern speculation offers fascinating possibilities. One centers on phosphorus, a substance known to the ancients in certain forms. A carefully prepared compound of white phosphorus could indeed ignite spontaneously upon contact with air, creating the illusion of a self-lighting lamp. More intriguing is the concept of a low-temperature catalytic reaction, a simple experiment known as the Cartesian devil, where a flame causes a suspended glass figure to dip in and out of water, demonstrates how heat can create motion through air pressure changes. Imagine a sealed vessel with a wick-like material coated in a catalyst, perhaps a platinum group metal, sitting above a reservoir of a volatile fuel like alcohol. The heat from the initial flame would vaporize the fuel, the vapors would rise, contact the catalyst, and ignite without a visible flame, creating a self-sustaining cycle of low-heat combustion. Such a device could theoretically glow for an exceptionally long time from a small amount of fuel. Whether through clever chemistry or early catalysis, the knowledge to build these enduring lights was not preserved. The techniques, if they ever existed beyond prototype, died with their makers. The consequence was a profound limitation on human activity. For the next 1,500 years, illumination remained stubbornly tied to the open flame, to smoky oil lamps that blackened ceilings and threatened homes with fire, and to tallow candles that guttered and died within hours. Light was a commodity to be carefully rationed, not a utility. This meant the night was truly dark, limiting productive work, study, and safe travel, effectively shrinking the useful day by half. The loss of the eternal flame, or even the pursuit of it, represents a forgotten branch of material science, one that sought not to conquer the darkness with a blaze, but to negotiate a lasting truce with it. If we could not preserve a simple, clean light, how much harder was it to preserve the very lens through which we see the world? A polished piece of rock crystal from ancient Assyria sits quietly in a museum case. Known as the Nimrud lens, this 3,000-year-old oval of ground quartz is slightly convex, and if you hold it just right, it can magnify an object beneath it. Far to the north and centuries later, Norse sagas speak of a sunstone, that could locate the sun's position even through dense cloud cover or fog. Modern experiments with a type of calcite crystal called Iceland spar show it can indeed polarize light, revealing a hidden pattern that points toward the sun. These two artifacts, separated by vast distances and cultures, whisper the same tantalizing truth: our ancestors were manipulating light with purpose long before we thought possible. The Nimrud lens was likely used as a simple magnifying glass, perhaps by a master craftsman to inspect fine engraving on seals or jewelry, or even as a burning lens to start fires. The Viking Sunstone, if the sagas are rooted in observation, was a sophisticated navigational computer, using the very physics of light to chart a course across the trackless ocean. Together, they represent a scattered, intuitive grasp of optics, a collection of brilliant tricks without a unifying theory. Yet that systematic science, the deliberate grinding of lenses to precise curves to correct human vision or to peer into the heavens, would not cohere for over a millennium. The gap is deafening. Imagine the collective genius that could craft the mechanism but never thought to pair a lens with its dials. The knowledge of how to shape glass or crystal into a reliable tool remained fragmented, a craft secret here, a navigational hack there, never evolving into the disciplined technology of the spectacles or the telescope. This delay had profound consequences. It kept two entire frontiers of discovery locked away. Without corrective lenses, scholars, and scribes, the very people preserving knowledge often saw their productive lives cut short as their eyesight faded in middle age. And without the telescope, the cosmos remained a tapestry of myth, the moons of Jupiter and the rings of Saturn invisible, the true structure of our solar system a mystery. Similarly, the microscopic world of bacteria and cells, the very mechanics of life and disease, remained utterly hidden. The delay in optics was a delay in our understanding of our own place in the universe, both the infinitely large and the infinitesimally small. We had the ingenuity to sense the sun behind clouds and to magnify a tiny seal, but we lacked the sustained curiosity to grind that knowledge into a lens that could change how all of us see. This failure to bring the distant into focus finds a parallel in another realm of exploration, where the challenge was not to see farther, but to venture deeper into a world of perpetual darkness and crushing pressure. The sheer scale of the would have dwarfed every other vessel on the ancient seas. Commissioned by King II of around the 3rd century before the Common Era, this was not merely a large ship, it was a floating city, a statement of power and engineering hubris made real. Its designer was none other than the legendary Archimedes, who applied his genius not to levers and spheres for this project, but to the immense practical challenges of keeping a wooden leviathan afloat. The numbers are staggering. Ancient sources describe a ship requiring wood from an entire forest, its hull sealed with massive quantities of pitch and tow. It was said to be capable of carrying nearly 2,000 people, including 600 soldiers, alongside a cargo that included grain, fish, salt, and wool. But this was also a luxury liner for the elite, featuring promenades lined with vines and potted plants, a gymnasium, a library stocked with books, and even a dedicated temple to the goddess Aphrodite. Its propulsion was a feat in itself, powered by 3 towering masts and requiring a crew of hundreds to man its banks of oars for maneuverability. To launch it, they had to construct an entirely new, specially reinforced dock. This vessel represented the absolute pinnacle of Hellenistic naval architecture, pushing the limits of what was thought possible with wood, rope, and human muscle. Its construction demanded novel solutions to problems of scaling. How do you design a hull strong enough not to flex and crack in heavy seas at such unprecedented size? How do you waterproof seams over hundreds of feet of planking? How do you distribute a massive, shifting load of cargo, people, and even soil for its gardens to keep the vessel stable? The answers, devised by Archimedes and the master shipwrights, were a closely guarded state secret, a synthesis of mathematics, materials science, and logistics. And then, that knowledge simply evaporated. The itself had a short, almost ceremonial life, reportedly gifted to the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, where its immense size made it impractical for regular use. More critically, the complex economic and political ecosystem required to fund and coordinate such a megaproject disintegrated. These were not ventures a local merchant or even a wealthy king could easily repeat. They required the centralized treasury, the vast resource networks, and the stable, long-term vision of a powerful state. As the Mediterranean world fractured in the following centuries, that capacity vanished. The ambition to build titans of the sea faded with the political structures that made them possible. For over 1,000 years, naval architecture contracted. Ships became smaller, more pragmatic, designed for trade or coastal defense, not for majestic display. The very idea of a ship as a self-contained palace, a floating piece of sovereign territory, was forgotten. This loss was more than a regression in boat building, it was a contraction in geographical imagination. When you cannot build a vessel capable of carrying a small community and its supplies for an extended voyage, your world necessarily shrinks. The horizon becomes a limit, not an invitation. The fate reminds us that technology is often a direct expression of political will, and when that will fragments, our tools and our worlds become smaller. A single surviving fragment of calfskin parchment from 1513 forces us to rewrite the entire history of exploration. In the palace in Istanbul rests a map drawn by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer. It is a beautiful, colorful artifact of the known world of his time, showing Europe, Africa, and the coast of Brazil. But its southern edge contains an impossibility. Below the Atlantic Ocean, the map depicts a landmass with a detailed, jagged coastline, labeled as the region of. The problem is stark. Antarctica, the frozen continent, was not officially sighted by European explorers until 1820. Even more perplexing, the coastline on the map does not show the continent as we see it today, buried under miles of glacial ice. Instead, it shows what many researchers believe is the actual, ice-free coastline of the continent, the shape of the land itself beneath the frozen cap, a profile that matches modern seismic surveys with startling precision. In his own notes on the map, was explicit about his sources. He wrote that he compiled it from about 20 older source maps and charts, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, and that he consulted a map drawn by Christopher Columbus. Most tantalizingly, he claimed some of his sources came from the lost library of Alexandria. This single statement opens a chasm in our historical timeline. It suggests that ancient civilizations, perhaps the legendary seafaring Phoenicians who circumnavigated Africa or the even earlier Minoans of Crete, possessed a cartographic tradition of stunning accuracy and global scope. They may have mapped coastlines from repeated voyages, passing down this knowledge through copies held in great libraries. The techniques implied are profound. To map a coastline so accurately without satellites required a mastery of celestial navigation far beyond simple coastal piloting. It demanded methods for determining longitude, a problem that would stump European sailors for centuries more. It required a system for translating the observations of many voyages onto a consistent scale and projection, a sophisticated mathematical cartography. And then, that entire school of knowledge vanished. The source maps crumbled to dust in unmaintained libraries or were lost in fires. The specialized guilds of long-distance navigators and chart makers, their skills passed orally or in closely guarded manuscripts, dissolved as their patron civilizations fell. The loss was catastrophic for humanity's geographical memory. It was a full reset. By the medieval period in Europe, the world had literally shrunk on maps, often depicted as a disk with Jerusalem at its center, surrounded by mythical beasts. The bold voyages of Prince Henry the Navigator, Columbus, and Magellan were not a continuation of an ancient tradition. They were a desperate, courageous rediscovery of a planet whose contours had been forgotten. The fragment is therefore more than a curious map. It is a ghost, a haunting trace of an entire epoch of human daring and understanding that was erased from the record. It whispers that the age of exploration was in many ways an age of recovery, a slow remembering of a world our ancestors may have already known. This staggering loss of global perspective finds a strange, intimate parallel in the loss of a technology that did not chart continents, but mapped the invisible architecture of the human body, guiding the healer's hand with a precision that would not be seen again for over a millennium. That swift movement of ideas and legions depended on a hidden world beneath their feet. The famous Roman roads, the Via, were masterpieces of civil engineering disguised as simple paths. They were not just clear dirt tracks, but complex, multi-layered structures designed to conquer distance and time. The process began with surveyors plotting the possible course, then laborers would dig a trench several feet deep. Into this trench went a foundation layer of large stones set in mortar or sand. On top of that, builders laid a thick course of rubble and crushed stone bound with cement. Next came the nucleus, a finer layer of gravel and sand, which was finally capped with the dorsum, the wearing surface of tightly fitted, often polygonal stone slabs that created that iconic, slightly cambered surface. This was a system built to shed water, with drainage ditches running alongside, curbstones to mark the edge, and regular mile markers to inform the traveler. The result was a durable, all-weather highway network that could support the relentless march of legions, the rumble of heavy supply carts, and the swift travel of imperial messengers. These roads were the physical internet of the empire, the vital infrastructure for military control, economic unity, and cultural exchange. Their decay was a slow unraveling of that connectivity. As the centralized authority that maintained them vanished, the sophisticated engineering knowledge required for their upkeep faded. No one remembered how to properly grade the subsurface or fit the stone paving to prevent water infiltration. The roads did not disappear overnight, they succumbed to entropy. Stone slabs were up for local building projects, drainage ditches filled with silt, and the intricate foundations were slowly swallowed by the earth. What remained for medieval Europe were often just the ghostly lines of the old routes, now degraded into muddy, treacherous tracks that turned to quagmires in the rain and became nearly impassable in winter. This regression had a profound chilling effect on the pace of life. Trade contracted to local markets, news traveled at the speed of a walking man, and the swift circulation of ideas that had fueled the Roman world slowed to a crawl. The loss of the via did not just make travel difficult, it shrank mental horizons, reinforcing the localism and isolation that defined the era. It was a literal and metaphorical roadblock to progress. Yet, even as the physical pathways crumbled, the dream of instantaneous communication never fully died. It lived on in a legend so persistent it hints at a technology we are still trying to grasp. A spiral of silent symbols holds a message we can no longer hear. In the ruins of the Manon Palace on Crete, archaeologists unearthed a simple clay disc, roughly 15 centimeters across, dated to the second millennium before the Common Era. Its surface is covered with 241 distinct symbols, arranged in a tight, clockwise spiral. There are human figures and heads, birds, fish, flowers, and a variety of geometric shapes, all pressed neatly into the clay. The immediate mystery is the language itself, a script unlike any other found in the ancient world, one that has stubbornly resisted all attempts at translation for over a century. But look closer, and a second, even more startling mystery emerges. Each symbol was not carved or drawn, but stamped into the soft clay with a separate, individual seal. This means the creator of the disc possessed a set of reusable type, a form of movable print, more than 3,000 years before famous press revolutionized Europe. Think about that for a moment. This was not merely writing, it was a primitive form of mass production, a technology for replicating information with speed and consistency. Yet this revolutionary idea appears as a solitary flash of genius, a single surviving artifact with no precedent and no successor in the archaeological record. The loss here is a profound double silence. We have lost not only the meaning of the words, the thoughts, prayers, or administrative record it was meant to preserve, but we have also lost the very concept of the technology that made it. Why was this method of stamping not adopted? Did it belong to a specialized guild that was wiped out in the volcanic eruption that devastated Thera and crippled Manon civilization? Was the disc itself an experimental prototype, a brilliant dead end? Its lonely existence suggests a path not taken, an entire branch of information technology that sprouted, bore one strange fruit, and then withered away completely. This silencing of a whole channel of ancient thought finds a haunting parallel in another art form, one that communicates not through stamped symbols, but through arranged vibrations in the air. What happens when we lose not a written language, but a language of sound? The roar of the crowd in a Roman amphitheater was once accompanied by a sound no civilization had ever heard before. It was the deep, commanding voice of the world's first keyboard instrument and a marvel of ancient engineering. This was no simple flute or lyre. It was a machine that married water, air, and human ingenuity to produce music of unprecedented power and consistency. Its inventor, of Alexandria, applied his genius for pneumatics to a new purpose, not just measurement or mechanics, but art. His design was brilliantly elegant. The musician sat before a series of keys, each connected to a valve. Beneath them lay the heart of the instrument, a large, airtight chamber partially filled with water. A hand pump or a weighted lever forced air into this chamber, where the water acted as a natural regulator, maintaining a constant pressure on the air reservoir above it. When a key was pressed, its valve opened, releasing this steady stream of air into a specific pipe, producing a clear, unwavering note that could be sustained as long as the air supply lasted. This was the revolutionary breakthrough. The water pressure eliminated the wavering, breathy inconsistency of a human blowing directly into a pipe. For the first time, a single musician could command a wall of sound capable of filling a vast circus or echoing through a stone theater, its notes cutting through the din of chariot races and gladiatorial combat. It became a symbol of Roman spectacle and technological sophistication, a centerpiece of public games and theatrical performances. But its significance ran deeper than entertainment. It represented a complete synthesis of disciplines, a working model of pneumatic and hydraulic principles made audible. The knowledge required to build and maintain one was intricate, involving the careful soldering of lead pipes, the precise tuning of bronze resonators, and an intuitive understanding of air pressure dynamics. This knowledge was not preserved. As the complex urban institutions that hosted these grand spectacles declined, the specialized workshops that built the instruments vanished. The delicate balance of water and air, the precise craftsmanship of the keys and valves, faded from common practice. The instrument itself did not entirely disappear, but it regressed. The sophisticated water pressure regulator, the very innovation that gave it its stable voice, was abandoned. When the organ re-emerged centuries later in medieval cathedrals, it was a different beast, powered by crude bellows that required teams of operators and produced a more erratic flow of air. The seamless, self-regulating system of the was forgotten. This loss had a quiet but profound impact on the evolution of music itself. Without complex mechanical instruments capable of producing sustained chords and layered harmonies, Western music remained largely focused on the human voice and simple, portable string or wind instruments for centuries. The development of polyphony, the interweaving of multiple independent melodic lines, was slowed. The had provided a physical platform for exploring how sounds could coexist and interact mechanically, a laboratory for harmony that was shut down. Its silence represents more than the end of a particular noise. It marks a pause in a conversation between technology and artistic expression. We regained the organ, but we lost the specific path that led to its first, most ingenious form. This forgotten dialogue between engineering and art finds a curious echo in another lost practice, one where the goal was not to create sound, but to capture its most perfect and mathematical expression in silent, vibrating stone. The warmth of a god's house was an engineering miracle. Long before Roman villas boasted their hypocausts, the Greeks had already mastered the art of heating sacred ground. The temple of Artemis at Ephesus, a wonder of the ancient world, was more than a breathtaking forest of marble columns. Beneath its polished floors ran a hidden network, likely a system of clay pipes or channels designed to carry hot air or water from a central furnace. Imagine the effect on a stepping from a cool morning into that vast space, their feet meeting not cold stone but a gentle, radiant warmth rising from the very foundation. This was not merely about comfort, it was a deliberate sensory experience, a way to make the divine presence feel immediate and benevolent through physical sensation. The technology itself was a precursor, a brilliant proof of concept. Yet, like the temple that housed it, this knowledge did not spread. It remained a singular marvel, a bespoke solution for one of the most important buildings in the Greek world. The reasons for its isolation are telling. Such a system was incredibly costly and labor-intensive to install and maintain, feasible only for a project of supreme cultural and religious significance, funded by empires and city-states. There was no economic or social drive to adapt it for common homes or public baths at that time. The engineering specifics, the precise layout of the ducts, the optimal heat sources, the methods for preventing cracks in the clay from thermal stress, all of this practical, hands-on knowledge was held by the architects and builders of that one temple. When the great structure was finally destroyed, first by fire and later by deliberate dismantling, its physical secrets were buried with its rubble. The concept of central heating did not disappear. It simply lay dormant, waiting for a society with a different set of priorities, the Romans, to rediscover and industrialize it on a massive scale for secular use. The loss of the system is a classic case of a brilliant idea trapped in its original context. It shows that innovation is not enough. It requires a social engine, a widespread need or desire to transition from a magnificent exception into a transformative technology. Without that engine, even the warmest marvel grows cold and is forgotten. The legend of Stephens carries the scent of smoke and polished bronze. As the Roman fleet closed in on the city, the great mind of Archimedes is said to have orchestrated a defense that seemed drawn from myth. According to ancient accounts passed down centuries later, he ordered soldiers to form a line along each holding a large, highly polished bronze shield. On his command, they angled these shields to catch the midday sun, focusing its rays onto the wooden hulls of the approaching warships. A single point of blinding light became many, converging into an invisible spear of heat intense enough to make the tarred seams of the ships first smolder, then burst into flame. The story of Archimedes' heat ray, his burning mirrors, has long lived in the space between history and legend. Scholars debate its authenticity, noting that the primary sources are not contemporary and that the tale grows more elaborate with each retelling. Yet, the fascinating question is not solely whether it happened, but whether it could have. Modern investigations have moved the needle from impossible to plausible. In 2005, a team from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology attempted to recreate the feat using 127 mirrored squares. They managed to ignite a wooden fishing boat replica from a distance, proving the fundamental physics works. A later experiment by the television show Mythbusters, however, struggled to achieve ignition, highlighting the immense practical challenges, the need for perfect weather, stationary targets, and flawless coordination. The true loss, then, may not be a historical weapon, but the applied optical engineering it implies. To make such a system effective would require an intuitive mastery of parabolic geometry, understanding how to shape and array reflective surfaces to converge sunlight into a precise, devastating focal point. It would demand a deployment strategy, a drill for soldiers to act as a single, cohesive optical instrument. This represents a lost branch of military technology, one not based on kinetic force or chemistry, but on the pure, focused energy of the sun itself. Whether Archimedes built it or merely conceived of it is almost secondary. The idea itself was a staggering leap, a transformation of a daily celestial phenomenon into a tool of defense. And then, that conceptual leap vanished from the strategic imagination for nearly two. The notion of harnessing concentrated solar energy as a weapon would not be seriously revisited until the 20th century with the development of high-powered lasers. The burning mirrors of real or aspirational stand as a ghost in the history of innovation, a brilliant flash of an alternative technological path that faded as quickly as the sunlight it sought to command. This vision of turning light into a weapon feels like the ultimate expression of a mind seeking to bend nature's own forces to human will, a theme that would find a quieter, more profound application in a technology meant not to destroy, but to create perfect harmony. A simple clay jar from 2,000 years ago could have changed everything. In the 1930s, workers excavating near Baghdad uncovered a collection of unassuming artifacts from the Parthian period, around 200 before the Common Era to 200 after. Among them was a 6-inch tall clay pot, sealed with asphalt. Inside, archaeologists found a rolled copper sheet forming a cylinder, and within that, an iron rod. The asphalt stopper had held both metals perfectly in place, insulated from each other, yet positioned to allow something to fill the space between them. It looked, for all the world, like a primitive battery. When a German researcher named examined the find, he proposed a startling hypothesis. If the jar were filled with an acidic electrolyte, something as common as vinegar or grape juice, the iron and copper would act as electrodes. The acidic liquid would trigger a chemical reaction, causing electrons to flow from the iron to the copper through the external circuit, generating a small electrical potential. Modern reconstructions have proven it works, producing a consistent voltage of around 1 volt. One jar is a curiosity, but several similar artifacts have been found, suggesting this was not a one-off accident. The purpose, however, remains one of history's most tantalizing mysteries. Some theorize it was used for electroplating, to deposit a thin layer of gold or silver onto objects for decoration. A low voltage could indeed facilitate this process if the object and the jar were connected in a simple circuit. Others suggest a more mystical application. Perhaps the mild shock was used in religious ceremonies to create a sense of divine contact or awe. It could even have been an early form of electrotherapy, where the tingling sensation was believed to relieve pain. But here lies the profound and heartbreaking gap. The Baghdad Battery, if that is what it was, represents a spark of understanding, a hands-on discovery of a fundamental force of nature. Someone, too ago, observed that these specific materials in this specific arrangement could produce this strange, invisible effect. They built a device to harness it. And then, they stopped. The knowledge never evolved into a theory of electricity. No one connected these jars in series to increase the voltage. No one explored different electrode materials. No one pondered the relationship between this jar and the static charge from rubbing amber. The spark was captured in a pot, and then the lid was sealed forever. This is perhaps the most poignant loss on our list, because it represents a path not just to a specific tool, but to an entire realm of physics. For over 1,000 years after the last of these jars was made, electricity remained a parlor trick, a mysterious force associated with lightning and shocks from cat's fur. The systematic study that led to generators, motors, and lights would have to begin again from scratch in the 18th century. The Baghdad Battery is a silent testament to a moment when humanity held a fundamental key to the modern world in its hands, turned it over with curiosity, and then, inexplicably, set it back down and walked away. What might our world look like if that curiosity had been nurtured, if that single volt had been the first step on a journey of electrical discovery that began in antiquity? The answer is lost in the same silence that surrounds the jar itself. High in the Andes, the stones themselves seem to defy gravity and time. The walls of, overlooking the ancient Inca capital of, are not built with uniform bricks, but with colossal, irregular blocks of granite, some weighing over 100 tons. These stones are not simply stacked, they are intricately carved and fitted together in a three-dimensional puzzle of breathtaking complexity. The joints between them are so precise, so seamlessly interlocked, that you cannot slide a piece of paper or even the blade of a razor into the cracks. This is polygonal masonry, and it represents a pinnacle of engineering art that vanished with the civilization that perfected it. The Incas, who called their empire, achieved this without the use of the wheel, without iron tools, and most astonishingly, without mortar. The stability came entirely from the geometry of the fit and the profound understanding of the materials. The process began at the quarry, where workers likely used harder stones to pound and shape the granite, possibly exploiting natural fracture lines and using water to expand wooden wedges inserted into drilled holes. But the true mystery lies in the transportation and final fitting. How did they move these titanic blocks across miles of mountainous terrain? Theories suggest a combination of earthen ramps, log rollers, and sheer human labor coordinated on a massive scale. Yet the final, delicate act of fitting remains the greatest puzzle. It is believed the masons would shape a lower stone, then repeatedly lower the upper stone onto it, using a paste or clay to mark the high points. They would then painstakingly grind away those marked spots on the lower stone, repeating the process over and over until the two faces matched perfectly across their entire, irregular surface. This was a slow, meticulous dance of stone on stone, a testament to patience and precision we can scarcely comprehend. But the genius went beyond mere aesthetics or display of power. This construction method was, fundamentally, brilliant anti-seismic design. An earthquake sends waves of energy through the ground, seeking rigid structures to crack and shatter. A wall held together with mortar is monolithic. It moves as one unit and is prone to catastrophic failure. The Inca walls, however, are assemblies of individual interlocking blocks. When seismic energy hits them, the stones are free to vibrate and shift minutely within their perfectly engineered joints, dissipating the energy harmlessly. When the shaking stops, they simply settle back into place, locked together once more. It is a system that has survived centuries of powerful Andean quakes that have leveled modern cities. This profound knowledge was an oral tradition, a craft passed from master to apprentice through demonstration and practice, intimately tied to the Inca worldview that saw stone as living, sacred substance. When the Spanish conquest arrived in the 16th century, they were focused on extracting gold and imposing a new order. They documented many things, but they had no framework to understand or value this indigenous engineering science. The master masons, were lost to violence and disease, and their techniques died with them. The conquistadors built their own churches directly on top of these indestructible foundations, often using the very stones they had from other Inca structures, but they could not replicate the craft. They used mortar to fill the gaps their crude techniques left behind. This represents a distinct and devastating Dark Age, one that occurred not in Europe, but in the Americas, severing a unique lineage of architectural genius. Modern engineers and architects still visit these sites not as tourists, but as students, using laser scanning and digital modeling to try to decode the principles behind the perfect fit. They stand in awe of a technology that achieved resilience through flexibility, that built for eternity by understanding movement, a lesson we are only now fully appreciating in our own seismic designs. The silent, enduring walls are a monument to a lost conversation between humanity and stone, a conversation that ended abruptly, leaving only its magnificent, unanswered sentences carved into the mountainside. A bronze vessel adorned with dragons stood as a silent guardian in a 2nd century Chinese court. In the year 132, the brilliant astronomer and engineer presented the Han dynasty with a creation that seemed to defy understanding, the world's first. It was an ornate bronze urn, perhaps 6 feet in diameter, encircled by 8 dragons, each facing a cardinal or direction. Below each dragon sat a corresponding bronze frog with its mouth open, waiting. Inside the vessel, the secret mechanism, a mystery to this day, was poised and sensitive. When an earthquake struck, even hundreds of miles away, the subtle tremors traveling through the earth would trigger the device. A single dragon, aligned with the direction of the quake's epicenter, would release a heavy bronze ball from its jaws. The ball would clatter down, landing squarely in the mouth of the waiting frog below with a resonant clang, announcing both the event and its origin to the astonished court. Historical records tell of it detecting a quake the people in the capital could not feel, its accuracy later confirmed by messengers arriving from a distant province. The genius of this device was not in its decorative mythology, but in its profound scientific leap. It moved the understanding of earthquakes from the realm of superstition and omens into the realm of instrumental measurement. For the first time, a natural phenomenon was not just experienced, it was objectively indicated and geographically located by a machine. The internal mechanism is the great loss. Some scholars theorize a carefully balanced pendulum hung in the center that would swing with the seismic waves and strike a lever to open one dragon's mouth. Others suggest an ingenious system of inertia, where a central column would tilt, causing a ball to roll down one of 8 internal tracks. We simply do not know. The precise design, the tolerances, the calibration, all of this hands-on engineering knowledge vanished in the centuries after its passing. This loss represents a stalled revolution in human thought. There was a prototype for an entire field of science, instrumental geophysics, that would not be reborn for over 1,500 years. Without such devices to systematically record the direction and timing of tremors, the study of earthquakes remained anecdotal and localized for centuries. Patterns that could have revealed the behavior of fault lines, the frequency of major events, or early warning signs were impossible to compile. Communities remained profoundly vulnerable, with no technology to give even a moment's warning or to help map the unseen stresses in the earth beneath them. The dragon's silent jaws remind us that a single invention can open a door to a new way of seeing the world, But if no one is there to walk through it and continue the journey, the door swings shut, and the path is overgrown once more. The sea held a partnership more profound than any net or spear. Along the shores of the ancient Mediterranean, from the time of the Minoans through the Roman era, a curious and beautiful collaboration may have unfolded with the dawn. Historical writers like Pliny the Elder recorded it, and fragments of art seem to hint at it, wild dolphins working in concert with human fishermen. The scenario is vivid. A pod of dolphins would locate a large school of fish, perhaps mullet or tuna, and begin to herd them toward the shore, leaping and slapping the water to create a wall of sound and motion. Wading in their boats or standing in the shallows, the fishermen would be ready, spreading their nets to create a final barrier. The dolphins would drive the fish directly into this wading trap, and in the chaotic harvest that followed, both species would benefit, the dolphins feasting on the confused fish that tried to escape the net's edges. This was not domestication. It was something far more rare, a voluntary, understood alliance between two intelligent species. The technology here was entirely intangible, a deep literacy in animal behavior, a language of patience and observed gesture built over generations. It was a protocol of trust, a mutual recognition that cooperation yielded a better result for all. This delicate understanding, if it was as widespread as the scattered accounts suggest, represents a loss of staggering subtlety. It is the loss of a symbiotic relationship with the natural world, a way of seeing other creatures not as mere resources or threats, but as potential partners in the shared challenge of survival. That cooperative model was gradually replaced by more efficient, more extractive, and ultimately more solitary methods. Larger nets, industrial-scale trawling, and technologies designed for maximum catch with minimal regard for the broader marine ecosystem became the norm. We mastered the mechanics of harvesting the sea, but in the process, we may have forgotten how to listen to it, how to collaborate with its other inhabitants. The silence of that lost partnership echoes in the empty waters where such coordinated hunts once thrived, a reminder that progress is not always measured by the power of our tools, but sometimes by the depth of our connections. The final, silent pulse of the Roman world was not a heartbeat, but the rhythm of hoofbeats on a paved road. The public way was the empire's central nervous system, a technological marvel built not from gears or glass, but from organization and logistics. This was a state-owned and operated courier service on a continental scale, a network so efficient it makes even our modern delivery services pause for thought. Imagine a message leaving the emperor's court in Rome, bound for a frontier governor in Britannia. It would not be carried by a single, exhausted rider on a single, spent horse. Instead, it moved in a flawless relay. At precisely spaced intervals along every major highway, the empire maintained the mutations, where a fresh horse and a rested rider were always waiting. For longer distances, there were larger rest houses, the mansions, offering food, lodging, and even vehicle repair. A government courier, bearing the proper imperial warrant, could swap his mount at each stop without breaking stride, allowing official dispatches to travel at a staggering pace of up to 170 miles in a single day. This was not just for mail. It transported officials, tax revenues, and military intelligence, binding the vast territories into a single, responsive organism. The technology here was entirely organizational, a master blueprint for synchronized motion. It required a permanent administrative class to manage the stations, a vast budget to maintain the horses and vehicles, and the absolute security of the roads themselves. The turned geography into a predictable equation, where distance was measured not in miles but in days, and those days were shockingly few. Its collapse was the severing of that nervous system. As imperial authority disintegrated, the funding vanished first. They were abandoned, the horses dispersed or stolen, and the specialized couriers found other work. The magnificent roads, now unpatrolled and crumbling, became hazardous. What remained was a profound and instant regression in the speed of human affairs. A message that once took a week to cross Gaul now took a month, carried by a private merchant or a lone traveler susceptible to weather, bandits, and the simple limits of a single animal's endurance. The consequences were catastrophic for governance. An emperor or a king could no longer respond to a rebellion or an invasion with timely orders. He often learned of the crisis only after it was over. Trade contracts became riskier, as market conditions could change completely between the writing of a letter and its arrival. News from the wider world, which had once flowed along these official channels, dried up, leaving communities isolated and rumors to flourish in the absence of facts. The loss was the blueprint itself, the intricate knowledge of how to coordinate thousands of people, animals, and facilities across thousands of miles to create a river of information that never stopped flowing. That conceptual leap, the idea of a dedicated, high-speed information infrastructure, was forgotten. For centuries afterward, communication reverted to its ancient human scale, limited to the distance a person could walk or ride alone. The world, which Rome had made small through system and speed, became vast and slow once more, its continents drifting back into silence. The most powerful technology of the ancient world required no tools at all, only the architecture of the mind itself. The bustling forums of Rome and the philosophical schools of Greece, the greatest orators and statesmen possessed a seemingly superhuman ability. They could recite epic poems from memory, deliver complex legal arguments for hours without a single note, and recall vast catalogues of historical precedent, all without the aid of a written text. Their secret was not a photographic memory, but a trained and systematic art, a cognitive technology known as the method of loci or the memory palace. This was not a vague trick, but a rigorous mental discipline taught by rhetoricians as a fundamental skill of public life. The student would begin by memorizing a familiar physical space in exquisite detail, perhaps their own home, a public building, or a walking route through their city. Every room, every corner, every statue became a storage location. To remember a speech, they would then take each idea, each point of argument, and transform it into a vivid, often bizarre image. They would then mentally walk through their palace, placing each image in a specific spot along the path. The first argument might be a striking shield leaning against the front door. The second, a bleeding stone on the entryway floor. The third, a whispering cloak hanging in the hall. To recall the entire speech, they simply took that mental walk again, observing each image in order, which would trigger the precise words and concepts attached to them. This method leveraged the brain's innate strengths, our powerful spatial memory, and our recall for the unusual, to create an internal filing system of astonishing capacity. It turned the mind into a library, with every thought having its own designated shelf. This was a true technology, a reproducible method for enhancing human capability, passed down through generations of teachers. Its decline was tied to a profound shift in how we externalize thought. With the gradual spread of writing, and later the printing press, knowledge could be stored outside the self, on parchment and paper. The immense, laborious training of the memory palace began to seem less necessary. Why spend years cultivating an internal art when you could simply write a note or consult a book? The classical education system that taught this art faded, and the skill retreated from common practice, becoming the domain of a few specialists and stage performers. The loss here is deeply symbolic, and it brings our journey full circle. We began with the loss of self-healing concrete and liquid fire, technologies of the external world. We end with the loss of a technology of the internal world, a systematic way to structure and retrieve knowledge within the human mind itself. It represents a shift from cultivating memory to relying on record, from training the mind as an instrument to outsourcing its functions to external devices. In forgetting how to build palaces within our own thoughts, we may have gained convenience, but we lost a profound intimacy with our own cognitive potential. The memory palace reminds us that the most sophisticated system we will ever encounter is the one between our ears, and that even our own innate abilities can be honed, structured, and in time, if neglected, forgotten. This final, silent loss invites a personal reflection, as our exploration of these 30 shadows comes to a close. This quiet cascade of forgetting reshapes our entire view of history. Our journey through these 30 lost technologies reveals that the Dark Ages were not merely a period of simple living, but an era of profound, systematic forgetting. We did not just lose objects or blueprints, we lost entire ecosystems of knowledge, the living chains of master and apprentice, the curated libraries, and the organized institutions that gave sophisticated ideas a home. A self-healing concrete formula vanished not because it was too complex, but because the trade network that supplied its special ash collapsed. The precise geometry of a Roman aqueduct slope faded because the professional class of surveyors who understood it disbanded. The memory palace, that intricate technology of the mind, retreated because we began to outsource our thoughts to parchment and print. Each loss, from the mighty Hypocaust to the subtle art of animal partnership, underscores a single critical lesson. Technological progress is not a guaranteed, inevitable upward climb. It is a fragile inheritance, a flickering torch passed from one generation to the next, and that handoff can fail. It fails when connections are severed, when curiosity is suppressed, when institutions crumble, or when knowledge is too closely guarded in a single, vulnerable place. The Dark Age is the shadow that falls when that light goes out. So what does this mean for us, standing here today on the shoulders of rediscovered giants? We are the beneficiaries of a second chance, a reconstruction. Our modern world is built on the painstaking recovery of principles that were once common knowledge. This exploration is more than of curiosities, it is a mirror. It asks us to look at our own civilization's foundations and ask, what are we doing to keep the flame alive? Which of our own advancements are vulnerable? Is our digital knowledge truly permanent, or is it stored on media that may become unreadable, in formats that may become obsolete, on platforms that could vanish? The lesson of the lost is a call to active stewardship. It urges us to value not just innovation, but preservation, to support not just research, but education and open exchange. We must be the librarians, the translators, the teachers, ensuring that the genius of our age does not become a cryptic artifact for some future civilization to puzzle over. If you found this dive into forgotten genius fascinating, there are countless more chapters waiting to be uncovered. Consider subscribing for more journeys into history's hidden corners, and share in the comments below, which of these lost technologies do you wish had never been forgotten? The conversation about what we preserve and why is one of the most important we can have.